What is succession planting and what are the benefits and how can I actually do it? Today we're going to talk about it. G'day there, I'm Dana from Puwaka Valley Homestead. I'm spending the day today in front of the fire. I've actually recording a couple of videos. The first one is on how to plan your spring garden, and this one is going to be all about how to implement and use succession gardening to get the very most out of the garden space that you do have. I actually have a spreadsheet that if you sign up for my newsletter you can get it for free, otherwise you can buy it from the store on my website. It's an interactive spreadsheet and I'm going to walk you through it once we've had a wee bit of a talk about what is succession planting and why do you actually want to be doing it. If you're new to gardening, I really recommend you check out my book. I've put it together. It's been quite the labour of love. It's called The Homesteaders Guide to Seasonal Gardening, and it will walk you through month by month, week by week, what you need to be doing in the garden to be growing your own food. It also has recipes there for seasonal produce, as well as different chores. There's a few lessons in there as well about different gardening things. So I recommend you check that out, and I'll put a link to it down below. Now, what exactly is succession planting? There's actually multiple different ways that you can use succession planting. The first one would be to plant the same crop in the same space, but to space them out so that when one comes out, the next one's coming up ready to go as well. So this is perfect for things like your salad greens or radishes, things that have that sort of higher turnover time, where you can put them in the ground and as they're maturing you can get the next lot ready, and you can either interplant them between them or plant them right next to them so that they start growing as well, and then you can take out the older ones and let the newer ones grow on. Given that plants grow much slower in the colder shoulder seasons, this can lead to a wee bit more overlap than maybe what you'd expected. So just be aware that if you're growing plants in the colder seasons, they're going to be taking at least 1.5 times to maybe up to twice as long to reach maturity than the things that have been grown in the peak summer season. So this means that you can space out those succession plantings just a little bit longer with things that are happening in the colder season. Another way to use succession planting is to have 2 or more plants using the same space but one after the other. So there's things like peas and lettuces that do much better in the colder seasons than they do in the heat of the summer. So you might want to get them growing in the colder, spring or autumn time, and then once they're finished, pull them out and replace them with transplants of things that are more suited to the hotter weather, things like your zucchinis or peppers or tomatoes, something like that. The third way of using succession planting is where you have 2 or more different crops growing in the same space at the same time. So this is also often called companion planting. So you'll usually choose some plants that go well together. I have got a chart all about companion planting, which is embedded in a blog post all about companion planting. So I'll link that blog post down below for you. Companion planting is when you're planting 2 or more plants that grow really well together. So a traditional one is known as the 3 sisters, where you grow corn and beans and squash together, and the corn grows up, the beans grow up the corn, and the squash covers the ground, feeds off the nitrogen from the from the beans, and helps keep the weeds down and helps keep the roots of the other plants cool. Planting carrots with radishes is another really common one, or growing lettuces underneath your peas and beans. Interplanting is another variant on this, where you are planting 2 different crops in the same space, but often you'll plant one and let it start maturing, and then just before it's mature get the next one started in between them. So this can be really good for example, like if you've got silver beet or beets or brassicas, some of those sorts of things growing, you can start another plant in between them of whatever your next crop's going to be, and then when the crop's ready to harvest, remove them and let the little baby plants that are now well established grow up and make the most of the space that's there. Another way of doing succession planting is to plant the same crop but different varieties that have different harvest times. So some different varieties of plants will harvest much earlier and much quicker than others. For example, this subarctic plenty tomato that I'm really keen to give a go this year has got a dates to maturity of about 60 days, which is quite different to my other tomatoes, which most of them have dates to maturity of sort of 80 to 85. Some of them are even 90 days. So that's sort of 3 to 4 weeks difference between the two. So you can have plants like that planted next to each other, and as the ones that are finished cropping are done, you can cut those out, leaving space for the plants that are going to continue to mature. Another type of succession planting is called catch cropping, and this is where you will grow a quick growing crop in amongst a slow growing one. So you could grow some salad greens between your brassicas because your brassicas are much slower growing. Or you could grow radishes in amongst your carrots because the carrots take ages, but the radishes will sprout and grow and be ready to harvest well before the carrots need the extra space. Catch crops are kind of considered a bonus crop. You can also sneak them in at the end of a season. So some of your faster growing things, you can sneak them in even if it's just baby spinach or something like that. Once you've taken stuff out, if you know that you've got a little bit more time until the season starts cooling down or until your frost is expected, then this is the time to sneak in some quick catch crops. And see if you can just get that little bonus harvest out of that last bit of time that you have. Crop rotation and succession planting work quite well in together. They are different things, but they have some similar overlaps as well. Succession planting is usually, well, I mean, as I've said, you can have the same plant in the same space. It's just making the most of the time you have, I guess, is the key with succession planting, to make sure that you're getting more than one harvest over the growing season that you have. Whereas crop rotation is getting the most out of the nutrients you're putting into the soil. So this is your crop rotation is usually when you will follow, for example, peas and beans will fix nitrogen in the soil. Brassicas are really heavy feeders, and other leafy greens love that nitrogen, so they're really good to come in after your peas and beans have been there. It's more making the most of the nutrients. It's also a really good way of helping break the cycle for bugs and pests, that sort of thing as well. It keeps them a bit confused. They don't have a chance to establish in one place. Now, before we go through the spreadsheet that I've put together showing you how it all works, we're going to talk quickly some tips that I've got for making sure that you're getting the most out of the ground you've got by getting the succession gardening working for you. The very first thing is to make sure that at the beginning of the season you're buying enough seed to get you through. There's no point in wanting to grow X number of rotations and only buying enough seed for your very first planting. Believe it or not, seed places do sell out, and this year in particular a lot of seed places have sold out, and that seems to be a combination of people panic buying and also people not being able to grow the seed the same as what they have in previous years, just due to not being able to be at work and things. So if you can, buy extra seed. Most of them will store for at least a year or two. I think the only thing that I can think of particularly that desperately needs fresh seed is parsnip, and to be honest, I grew 3-year-old seed for my parsnips last year and they all seem to sprout just fine. But parsnip is the classic one that they'll say you need fresh seed for parsnip. But most other things will last for quite some time, quite happily, especially if you're storing them somewhere dry and cool and dark. If you're not sure how many seeds you need, check out this video up here that I have done actually I did it about 5 minutes ago, but you'll see it a few days earlier than this video. And it goes through how to actually plan out how many seeds and how many plants you're going to be needing for the season. And that way you'll have a better idea how many packets you're going to want to be buying. The next thing for getting the most out of succession planting is to make sure you're feeding that soil really well. Generally speaking, manure and compost is there to feed the soil more than to feed the plants. So what you're wanting to do is feed that microbiome that's growing in there, feed the soil web, and those bugs and bacteria, fungi, all that sort of stuff in there are the ones that break that down and make those nutrients available to your plants. This is the same reason I'm not big into tilling, because it tends to sort of mix up and mesh up that food soil web thing, and then it just takes them that little bit longer to get restructured and refunctioning before they can start feeding your plants again. So I have found the best way is to tarp over the top of my garden beds for the winter, and this helps protect the soil, make sure nothing's getting eroded, nothing's getting washed away. It gives the worms an opportunity to come to the top and eat whatever's up there. It kills off all the weeds, and then you add a good couple of inches of some compost, which will feed the garden for the following season. And then your garden will have pretty much no weeds in it because you're not digging in it to get the weeds back to the top. And you're making sure you're feeding that soil web without disturbing it, and then you can just sneak your plants in there. Another thing you'll have to do to get the most out of succession planting is to get a bit ruthless. Plants will produce, and then you'll get diminishing returns from there on out. So you're usually better to get the first harvest, maybe the second harvest, and then cut your losses, get it out, and get something else in there growing. Your compost, your pigs, your chickens, other things will benefit from the plants that you've pulled out. They don't have to go to waste, but get them moved on, and you keep getting the plants when they're at the prime of their season, when you're getting the best of the best out of them. And of course the key with succession is to be planting your seeds not just all at once. You don't want to do one big seed sowing day and that's it. What you want to be doing is once a month, maybe once every 6 weeks, working out what things you're going to need to be planting for your upcoming harvest and get those in as well. Spreading your seed sowing out over the season, well, one, it's less work all at once, right? But also it's going to give you that ongoing harvest, and it gives you a bit more flexibility, I suppose is the word, depending on what the weather's doing. You know, the chickens might have got in there and ripped up some, or the blackbirds, dang those blackbirds, if they've got in and dug up your plants, then all is not lost. You can sow some in the next round. One thing I really recommend you do is start yourself a gardening notebook. This is the one I have used since we've been here, so it's been about 4 years. I write all the varieties, when I've planted them, when I've harvested them, any notes about them, also some notes about the weather, if it was a particularly wet summer or it was really cold until later, that sort of thing. It's a really good resource. Write down your first frost dates and your last frost dates, because despite there being information online for your general area, each individual house will have a difference. It depends where your garden's positioned, what trees you have, where the wind comes. All those sorts of things can affect your own frost dates for your specific little area. So I keep track of all of those in here as well. And then you might want to go a little crazy like I have and put together quite a plan. This was so what I did first was worked out what plants I wanted to grow in which garden, and then I worked out from the dates. This one here has the dates to maturity, the different varieties, and the spacing, which was really helpful. I just found most of this information was on the website that I bought my seeds from. And then I've used that to work out what plants I'm going to put in what bed, when they were going to be sown, when they're going to be harvested. And also it gave me a chance to put in cover crops and tarping, that sort of thing. And so that was the timetable. And then from that, I worked out my monthly plan. So last year it didn't quite go as well as I'd hoped. We did have a really wet summer. But I did manage to get 2 different successions of plants out of pretty much all my garden beds. I had planned for 3 in some of them, but it just didn't work out. But the upside to doing multiple plantings is I knew that the harvesting wasn't coming up anytime soon, so I just skipped that lot of seed sowing, so nothing went to waste, and I just planted them a few weeks later instead. Personally, I don't do a huge deliberate round of crop rotation with my garden beds. I do sort of swap them round, which beds different things are growing in, but there's a limit to realistically how much planning you can put into a garden and how much it actually works out in reality. So I think as long as you're not growing some things like potatoes, which are prone to blight, if you get a bout of blight in your potatoes, don't grow them in that garden bed next year. Move them to somewhere else. If you've got brassicas and you end up with them struggling, there's a chance that they might have root rot. and you don't want to be growing them in the same garden bed again next year. Put them somewhere else. Other than that, plants are pretty tolerant, they're pretty resilient, and you can just move them around as you can, but don't. I think the whole crop rotation thing, it's a great idea, and it is a really good way of making the most of your nutrients, but it's not a live or die by rule. And I think getting more succession plants into the garden is probably going to be more beneficial than missing out on the succession plants because you're trying to follow a rotation plan. It's always a good idea to have a few spare seedlings in case you have something dies off or you have a surprise gap. It's always good to have something ready to just go in the garden. Right, I'm going to jump on the computer and I'm going to talk you through how the succession plant plan works. Right, now when you sign up for my email list, this is the link that you'll get, and you get to choose whether you want the Southern Hemisphere one or the Northern Hemisphere one. The calculations in them are slightly different, just so that you're not getting told the complete opposite of what you need to be told. So the very first thing you need to do is up the top here, add in your last frost date and your first frost date. So for us, these are the dates. Our last frost date, I don't know why I've got the 10th of October, usually it's the 10th of September. So you can just double click on it and find the date that you're looking for. So we'll go with 10th of September. Our first frost date, we don't usually get them until May. In town, they tend to get them sort of the middle of April, but out here, I guess being a wee bit more coastal, not such an issue. So then as we scroll down, it has on the left-hand side here all the vegetables you can pretty much think of that are common to grow in your backyard. They're listed alphabetically. And if you go along here where it says direct seed, if you put an X or delete that, it will change a few things along here, but there we go. So some of them direct seed, some of them you transplant. You choose if you want it in your full garden or not. You can remove it from there, and whether you want it in succession gardening. This transplant growth time in weeks, you can change that depending on what you find for yourself, how long your plants are taking from seed sowing to when they're ready to transplant. How many weeks? The date, I think it's weeks. I can't remember. Whichever it is, I think it's weeks before. Anyway, just leave those ones. And so this will give you a date that you can get your very first seeds in, the day that you can get them outside, what date you want to be planting them for your autumn planting. And then if you want a succession straight after, so the succession one over here is the 5 weeks, which is your transplant growth time after your seed start date. So if you scroll across, it has all the way up to succession 10, unless it runs out. If the frosts happen, it should not populate those. So yeah, that's one way of working out when you should be planting all your different plants. It does have a section down here for herbs and flowers as well. And then if you go, oops, I need to move this out of the way. You can go over there. And down the bottom, there's another tab that has plant info. And this plant information is actually pulled into the calculations on the front sheet. So anything you fiddle with in here will change on the front sheet. So you make it work for whatever plant you have, whatever spacing you want, whether they need full sun, partial sun, and what seasons they grow in, all those sorts of things. Your number of succession days, that's definitely pulled into the front. So those sorts of things you can fiddle with if you want to. Try not to break it. The link you're given will ask you to take a copy of this, so you won't have direct access to the master copy, thankfully. So if you need another copy of it, if you do accidentally break something, just flick me an email and you can access this. I'll send you the link to get yourself another copy. Thanks for watching. I hope you found this video really useful. If you have, hit the like button. Share it with anyone you think might find it useful, especially that succession planting PDF. Anyone that wants it, just sign up to the newsletter and you can grab it for free. And consider subscribing to our channel. We bring you videos twice a week on growing and preserving your own food and other homesteading bits and pieces. And I'll see you in the next one.